Hi, this is Laura Staley, and I'm back with another video about Excel. Now, today I am going to give you an introduction to Excel functions. And these are calculations that are built into Excel that make it easy for you to calculate all kinds of things. Now, if you want to see what's available, if you go to formulas up on the ribbon, there's Home, Insert, Draw, Page Layout, Formulas. It will take you to the formulas area and show you what's available. There are over 400 functions built into Excel. And no, you are not going to probably use anywhere near all of those. You will use a fraction of them. But they are available, and there's all kinds of things that you can do with them. So today my goal is to give you an introduction to them and show you some of the more simple ones that are very handy to a lot of people. Now, if you look across here, there is recently used. So if and when you use some, you will find the ones that you have used in the recent past here. And then it goes into the categories, and there is financial functions that you can use, and in any one of these categories you can scroll down and see what is available there. And so these are financial functions. There is logical functions. We're going to cover one of these, and if is probably the most used logical function. And basically it lets you do things like say, if this is true, then do this, but if it's false, then do that. Or you have and, you have or, and some of these will be included in more complex functions. And then there's text. One of the most used text functions is concatenate, which is where you take two different text strings and put them together. For example, you might have the list of first names in one column and list of last names in another column, and you may want to put them together in a third column so that you have someone's full name for some reason. And there's other things. There's find. There's, give me the leftmost letters or data. Give me the rightmost data. All kinds of things. There is date and time. One of the things that you can do is date value, which is to convert a date into a value that you can then use in functions. There is lookup and reference. There are different ways that you can say, I have this massive amount of data and I want you to find certain cells based on different criteria. And then there is math and trig. Sum is probably the number one, add a column of numbers. But there's all kinds of other math and trig. And then there is this more category that has even more. Statistical. We will cover average. Instead of you having to add up a bunch of numbers and then count how many numbers there are and divide by that number, it will do it for you automatically. And then there's functions for engineers, cubes, information, compatibility, and all kinds of things. And I have used a fair number of functions, and it probably doesn't break more than a few dozen. And I would guess that's probably true of most people. So the goal I have is to introduce you to some that you may be able to use immediately, and then in later videos, get into more advanced types of things that you might use down the line. Okay, so that is where you find them. Now, if you're not sure what you want, you can go to the function wizard, which is this little button right here to the left of the formula bar, and if it says FX, and if I click on that, it's going to kick me into the function wizard. And what I can do is I can search for a function. So for example, if I know I want to average some numbers, I can type in average, and hit enter, and it's going to give me all of the different functions that has some kind of average functionality to it. And in this case, I would want the first one. So if I either double click on that or click and click OK, it's going to kick me into this box. And this is really handy when you're trying out a function and you aren't quite sure of the syntax. So basically, I would identify the numbers that I want to average here and then click OK, and it would do it for me. So I could click here and have either a single cell or a range of cells. And here I could have a second number or a second range of cells, and it keeps going on up. Okay, so down here it tells me that I can have up to 255 numeric arguments for which I want to average. So you could average quite a few number of cells or ranges. Okay, I'm going to cancel out of that because we will be covering average in a little bit. Okay, let me come back over here. Okay, so let's get started. Now I'm going to cover 10 of the most handy functions in Excel, and my hope is that you will find at least some of these handy. So let's start with sum, because that's probably the 500-pound gorilla. I'm going to type in sum here and hit tab so that I am at the bottom of this first column labeled January. Now, I am going to, just like formulas that I covered in my last video, every function starts with an equal sign. So if I forget to type in the equal sign and I type in a function, then when I get done, it's just going to sit there and look at me. So I have to have an equal sign to tell Excel that something mathematical that it's going to need to calculate is coming. Okay, now let me show you 3 different ways to do the sum. If I happen to know that the sum function is sum, I can do equal, type in sum, and open the parenthesis. And then I want to sum these 4 numbers here. So I can click and drag, or I could type in manually B5 colon B8. Now let me explain this. A range in Excel is this cell to this cell. And remember from the previous video that cell references are the combination of the letter at the top of the column and the number at the start of the row. So the first number here, 2.95, is in B5, and the last number is in B8. So to designate a range, to say, if I was writing this on paper, I would probably write B5 dash B8. But what is that in Excel? That's subtracting. I would subtract 2.56 from 2.95. So that doesn't work. So Excel uses a colon to indicate that it's a range. So I would write on a piece of paper a dash, but in Excel, the equivalent is a colon. So I would type in B5 colon B8, or I can click on the top number and simply drag through the bottom number and it will fill it in for me automatically. Okay, does that make sense? So I typed in equal sum, open parenthesis, clicked and dragged, and now I'm going to hit enter, and it gives me the result. Now you do have to have a closing parenthesis, but when I hit enter on a simple function like this, and there's an opening parenthesis, and I hit enter before I type in the closing parenthesis, then Excel just puts it in for me. It used to not do that, and it was such a pain. So the total is 10.51. Okay, so in this second column, let's do it another way. I'm going to come up to this FX button that I showed you before. And remember, I want sum. So I'm going to type in sum and hit enter. And I can type in the cells above it, which are C5 through C8. So I can say C5 colon C8. Now, when you're typing in cell references, it doesn't matter if they're uppercase or lowercase. Excel will automatically make them uppercase once you've typed them in, but it will take lowercase. So don't worry about whether you have to capitalize it or not. Sometimes I do it automatically and sometimes I don't. Okay, so I can type in the cell reference, or I can make sure that this window is where I can see my cells. I can click and drag on this top bar and I can drag over it. Either way works. And when I'm done, I click OK, and there's my result. Now, the last way is really the way that most of the time you're going to want to go because it's so simple. If I am on the Home tab, and that's usually where I am, because I usually don't go to formulas. I usually just go through the FX button, or I know what I want, so I type it in. Over here in the editing group, there is a Sigma, and that is an AutoSum button. Now, when I talked about in one of my first videos how to enter data into Excel, I stress that you do not want blank lines or blank columns for decorative purposes because it's going to mess things up with some of the things that you're going to want to do in the future. Well, the future is now. What if you do not have blank lines and columns and I'm clicked here and I hit this button, it's going to look above and go to the first cell that is either blank or text and just include the numbers. So if you embed blank cells between your numbers, then it's going to choke. So don't use blank lines or blank columns for decorative purposes inside your data. You can use formatting, which I covered in another video, to help delineate what is what in your spreadsheet. So I'm going to click this button and it's going to say, okay, you want the sum? I look up. Here's the numbers above it. Is that what you want? Assuming the answer is yes, and in this case it is, I hit enter or return on my keyboard, and voila, I'm done. Now, this wasn't very impressive here because I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers that I'm adding up. But if you had a column of 100 numbers above you, it's really impressive. Okay, so that's 3 different ways to get my sums. Now, I am going to highlight these cells, come over here to cell styles, and format them as a total so that it's easier to tell that those are a function and they aren't just plain data. Okay, now the next one we're going to do is average. Okay, and I alluded to this earlier. I can do the exact same options. I can use my equal sign, open up my parenthesis. Nope, sorry. Type in my equal sign, type in the function name, open up my parenthesis, click and drag over the cells I want to include. I don't want to include the sum, of course. And then when I'm done, hit enter, and there is the average of that cell. I also have the option of hitting the FX button and typing in average, which because I did it before is here, or I could type it in and find it. Click OK and say, okay, I'm going to drag over the cells for number 1, which is a range. Click OK, and there it is. Okay, I'm going to show you another way of getting a function into a cell. And this is called AutoFill. I haven't done a video on this yet. And this is just one aspect of that um, functionality, but it is a handy one. If I have the same formula running across a row and I do a one function, I can drag that over and just copy it instantaneously. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you look in the lower right hand corner, let me make this bigger. If you look in the lower right hand corner of this cell, there is a little square notch that if I put my pointer over it, it turns into a black crosshair. Okay, and that's what I need, not the big fat white plus, not the pointer. I want that black crosshair. When I click and drag, it's going to say, okay, you want to copy the formula or the function that was in that cell over into the next cell, and it's going to automatically change the arguments, the cell references for me. So I dragged it from C to D, and it automatically changed the range from C5 colon C8 to D5 colon D8 for me. Now that's really handy when you do a function in the first cell of a row and then you click and drag it over for the rest of the cells. You can save so much time. Okay, the next functions that we're going to cover are very similar. They're max and min. Max is for maximum and min is for minimum. And so sometimes you may have a big column of numbers and you want to know what the highest value in that column is. Or conversely, you may want to know what the lowest value in that column is. Now, when you have four cells, it's pretty easy for me to eyeball it and go, oh, 1.89, that's the lowest. But if you have a lot of numbers, you may not be able to do that as well. So before I do this, I'm going to highlight these and format these as cell styles and total. So they stand out as well. Okay, so I'm going to do max and I'm going to do min. I might as well go ahead and format these as totals so they stand out. Okay, so the way I do this is like I did before. I could either go to the FX button and search for it, or if I know it exists, I can just type it in. So I'm going to type in equal max, open parenthesis, click and drag over these cells to include, hit enter, and there it is. Let me shrink this down a little so I don't have to keep. Okay, so the highest is 3.11. Now I want to do the exact same thing in the next two columns over. So I'm going to click back on that cell, put my pointer in the lower right hand corner, click and drag, and voila, there you go. It automatically copies that function into the next two columns and adjusts the cell references for me. Okay, the next one is equal min, open parenthesis, click and drag, hit enter, and the lowest is 1.89, like I said before. And if I want to do the exact same in the other two, I'll click and drag and copy those over. Okay, now the last one in this section that I'm going to cover is the if. And this one is a little bit more complicated, but it's not too bad. So if I type in if and format that as a total. Okay. Remember, the if statement is one where I say, well, if this is true, then do that, but otherwise do something else. So in this case, if I want to label the sums and say, if it is over 10.75, it's high. But if it's below 10.75, it's low. Okay, in this case, I'm going to go through the function wizard because I think that will make more sense. So if I type in if and hit enter, find if, click OK. Okay, now the first thing it wants is the logical test. Remember what I said the logical test is. If the sum, so I'm going to click on the cell, if B9 is greater than 10.75. Okay, so if the sum B9 is greater than 10.75, if it is true, if it is higher, I'm going to have it insert the word high, and I have to put it in quotes. And that way, Excel knows just put that in there. If it is not over 10.75, I want to enter low. And again, I'm encapsulating that in double quotes. Okay, so notice down here it says value if false. The value returned is false. So basically what it's telling me is that in this column that this number is not over 10.75, which 10.51 is not. So it's like a test or a check to make sure that my logic is valid. So it is. So I'm going to click OK. And there it is. I've got low now. Okay. And again, I'm going to copy this over. And it shifts the cell references for me. And the only sum, which is over 10.75, is this third one, as you can see here. Okay, does that make sense? Those are some examples of the types of things you can do. If you have never used functions before, you're probably not going to use them all. You may use sum and average. And then go from there as you learn more. If you have been using it for a while, you may say, hey, I could have used max 2 weeks ago, or I could have used that if function last month. So take a look at those. Now, there's one other thing I want to do, and that is to cover the count functions. We covered sum and average, but sometimes instead of manipulating the numbers, you may just want to count the things that are in your spreadsheet. So I'm going to cover the 3 basic ones, and in a future video, I'm going to cover the more advanced ones, like count if, count the number of things if they match a certain criterion. But there are 3 automated ones that are more simple. Those are count, count A, and count blank. Now, you may think that count would count everything, but it doesn't. Count only counts cells with numbers in them. If it's blank or if it has text in it, it does not count it. So in this case, I could go through the FX, but I'm going to type in equal count, open parenthesis, and I am going to highlight these 6 cells and hit enter, and it's going to say 3. And it's saying 3 because there's only 3 cells in these 6 that have numbers in them. Okay, now you may be asking, how in the world would I know that? And the only way you know that is to learn it. So the first time I remember way back years ago, and I could not figure out why would the count function would not count the number of employees that I had listed above. I had names above it. And finally someone told me put an A on the end of it and it'll do it. So let me show you. If I type in equal count A, open parenthesis, and then highlight these 6 numbers, okay? There's 3, and again, notice A, B, and C. Now, let's say I want to count the number of blank cells. I have a big column of numbers and I want to know how many cells there are that don't have data in it, so I know how much work it's going to take me to look up the stuff. I'm going to click back here in the first one, and I'm going to type in equal count blank, open parenthesis, highlight all those cells, hit enter, and it's 3 because there's 1, 2, and 3, and then there's 3 blank cells here. And I'm going to copy this one over to this one. Okay, you with me so far? Okay, let's do these again. So I have this column of numbers, and I've got 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. So if I were to count, I would type in equal count, open parenthesis, and then hit enter, and it's 3. If I count A, open parenthesis, hit enter, you'll highlight the stuff, hit enter, it's 6. Now the reason why is because count A will count everything that's not blank. So it will count numbers, letters, everything. Count will only count numbers. And count blank, I'm going to type in equal count blank, open parenthesis, highlight those 6 cells, hit enter, and it's 0. And the reason why is because in this case, every cell has something in it. Okay, so those are the 3 simpler count functions that you can use. So the question is, do you just want to count numbers? Do you want to count everything except for blanks? Or do you want to count just blanks? So count A, count blank. Okay, this is the introduction to Excel functions. Look for future videos when I'm going to go into a few more basics about Excel functions, and then I'm going to make some videos on specific types of functions in depth. So for example, I will make a video about count functions in depth and sum functions in depth, so that you can see that there's more that you can do than to just add up a column of numbers or count up 6 cells. So look for my future videos and have a good day.